Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is TowerGate day 450, Sunday morning, June the 3rd, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. I sure hope I got the date right. Oh my goodness. Well, folks, I'm happy to be coming to you today and giving you the good news. Here's the good news. The coup has failed. That's right, the coup has failed. I am declaring the coup an official failure. And I'm going to lay out for you the details of why I believe that the coup has failed. When I talk about the coup, of course, you know I describe it as a frame-up, but what it actually was a combination of tactics employed by Mr. Potato Head, initially working with his friends in British intelligence. And of course we know about that little agency he set up, and we're now beginning to look a little deeper and a little harder at that agency and who the players were, and starting to understand that the intelligence was manufactured and fed to the FBI via private contractors. It was all an engineered plot which contained a combination of things such as massive surveillance, informants, agent provocateurs, assets, and about a half a dozen attempts at frame-ups, which would prove or try to prove that individuals within Trump's campaign were colluding some way with the Russians to impact in some way the 2016 elections, and even would take it a step farther. For some people would want to make the claim that there was an even bigger plot working with the Russians, Putin, Trump, Manafort, Carter Page, to hack the DNC, get the emails to WikiLeaks, to destroy the rotten Reverend Clinton. That is pretty far out there, but people still believed that up until very recently. I noticed about 6 to 8 weeks ago the major shift in the momentum, and at that point I thought, okay, there's a major momentum shift going on here. And at that point you begin to notice the people like Brennan, McCabe, Comey, and all the rest out there going hard on defense on Twitter, on MSNBC, CNN, and all the rest. Hardcore defense, trying to defend themselves. That means that we now have the ball. We are marching down the field, and they are in full defensive mode. And the reason, I'm going to get to the details in just a moment, is that every single one of these things that they tried failed. Most of them failed completely. A couple of them were fails. They did get a little something, but not enough to accomplish their objective or to justify everything that they did. And keep in mind, what's been going on since Trump won the election has been to essentially cover up. And the way to do that, and the way they've been trying to do that, is to create the reason why they did what they did after the fact. You see, their timeline, their activities, and their explanations, and the documents and the evidence do not match the timeline. We now know, and it's becoming clear for everyone to see, there's tons of evidence that there was many activities going on long before the official investigation supposedly began, July 31st of 2016. We know that this goes all the way back to late 2015, maybe earlier. So I'm going to go through with you now, frame up by frame up, fake piece of intelligence by fake piece of intelligence, line by line, and show you where every single thing they did that we're aware of failed. Let's get started. Time is short. Let's start with the very beginning. Brennan claims that Estonian intelligence intercepted a phone call in 2016 that suggested that Putin was pouring money into the Trump campaign. The tip turned out to be bogus. Mr. Potato Head went ahead and created an interagency task force. Remember that. This is key. This interagency task force has been largely overlooked. But this interagency task force is where the real coup plot was being run. The counterintelligence operation being run by Peter Benstrokenis at the FBI was a cover. It was fake. The real operation that they were running was the operation being run by Mr. Potato Head with this interagency task force using multiple agencies: the CIA, the FBI, the DOJ, NSD, NSA, DOD, and state. The task force that Mr. Potato Head set up was run out of Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters. The activities of the task force occurred both before and after the FBI investigation, Operation Hurricane, the counterintelligence operation that started July 31st, 2016. Why Operation Crossfire, Hurricane Crossfire? Well, if you look at the name, the hurricane was how they were just going to slam the Trump campaign with massive amounts of fake intelligence, raw fake intelligence, media propaganda, and all these frame-ups that were just going to hit them. And I think the crossfire means the fact that they were using their friends over across the pond in the UK as the crossfire back across the ocean. They were hitting from both continents. They were hitting from both sides. British intelligence and the CIA working together, as well as this little inside task force that Brennan created. It had intelligence people from all the major intelligence agencies all in there, so that each department was accessed working in unison, and they were all working together. And then they had British intelligence feeding the raw data while the rest of these guys spread it out, just dispersed it out through various sources: Fusion GPS, Christopher Steele, Mr. Downer, and all the rest. Spreading all that information to British intelligence, feeding everything back. Just a gigantic feedback loop of artificial, fake intelligence. And we're going to go through it. So, Mr. Potato Head, on his first attempt with this Estonian intelligence, we find out it's fraudulent intelligence. Turned out not to be true. There was no evidence of the Putin donating money to the Trump campaign, as if they have any. So, once again, once Hurricane Crossfire was created, it was really created as a cover for the real operation that was really going on, which was being run out of the CIA in Langley. This is where we want to focus now. Operation Hurricane was a distraction. There wasn't anything to it. What it was really being run was this other operation. That's what was running everything. And Peter Benstrokenis was, of course, the key man in Operation Hurricane, but he was also a key man, probably the number 2 man, in the Brennan operation with this interagency task force. This interagency task force is the root of the operations, as you will see. So, once that first attempt with the Estonian intelligence failed, it didn't stop Brennan from creating the task force. So the task force then moved on to another opportunity, where they targeted Trump Tower with surveillance based on Manafort and Carter Page having offices in Trump Tower. The target, the real target, of course, was Trump's server in Trump Tower. Of course, it was analyzed and given the all clear, meaning this frame-up failed too. As I said, I will prove to you that every one of their attempts failed. The Estonian intelligence failed. Trump Tower failed. Next, they decided to go with another plot. This time, Mr. Potato Head, John O'Brien, was only getting started. Next came his next operation with his accomplice, Peter Benstrokenis, who began the increased surveillance through national security letters and FISA warrants. So now he's activated Peter's been stroking us, because the CIA cannot get domestic surveillance warrants or write national security letters. The FBI does that, or the Attorney General, or I imagine the President. Of course, he knew about it all. Then we get Mr. Halper, the fat man, Stefan Halper, the same guy who in the fall of 2015 passed a tip to British intelligence, GCHQ, about Mike Flynn getting cozy with a Russian suspected agent. The accusation, again, turned out to be 100% false. This one failed too. The woman was a British citizen, a member of the Cambridge Project, as a researcher and historian. Not one shred of the allegation was true about Flynn and this woman. But that did not stop Mr. Potato Head, Peter's been stroking us, and Loose Lisa Page and the secret society from their mission. So, another fail. Another piece of intelligence that turned out to be false. Next, Mr. Halper, the fat man, went after his mark. George Papagalopoulos. Mr. Potato Head, John O'Brennan, would now employ the agent provocateur. Assisting Mr. Halper would be his good friend, Alexander Down the Hatch Downer. And of course, the mutual friend and accomplice between Halper and Brennan was Richard Dearlove, former head of British intelligence at that time. It was also the fat man, the agent provocateur, who was the control officer for the operations. Mr. Halper had made contact with Carter Page back in early May of 2016, long before any FBI operation, which means he wasn't working for the FBI, was he? No, he was working for John Brennan's special little group, who, when we get to the end of this, you're going to find they will be exposed as being actually where the operations were run from. And Operation Crossfire was just a fancy phrase and a cover-up to disguise what was really happening, being run in the bowels of the CIA in Langley, Virginia, by Mr. Potato Head, and our good friend Mr. Dearlove running operations on the other side of the pond. Thank you very much. So we have the fat man making contact with Carter Page in early 2016, 2 months before the official start of the investigation, according to the FBI. Of course, we watched as Mr. Halper, the fat man, bootstrapped his way to Mr. Clovis to get to his mark, Mr. Papagalopoulos. Now, while Mr. Halper was carefully stalking his prey, the Department of Justice, operating within Mr. Potato Head's task force, launched their own little frame-up operation, the Trump Tower meeting. As with everything else in this comedy of stupidity, time does reveal, as well as the facts, of the obvious setup of the Trump Tower. It's obvious by the setup letter from Rob Goldstone to Trump Jr. It's obvious with Vessel in the Sky's connection to Confusion GPS. Individuals in that meeting associated with Glenn Simpson, CIA, military intelligence, Clinton, and various others, and the peripheral. It was a straight-up frame-up. Confusion GPS is listed on the CIA website as a contractor. Glenn Simpson has a close relationship with the CIA, participated in many functions, speaking as an expert in many cases on corruption in Ukraine and Russia and various things and such. He's attended quite a few of those conferences as a speaker at CIA functions. Very close relationship with the CIA. We know that Confusion GPS does a lot of work in foreign countries where there's a lot of problems, a lot of corrupt dictators, a lot of nasty things. They're involved in all of it because the way they operate is they do smear campaigns. They're not really a media organization because they don't themselves publish anything. They create the lies and then they distribute it through other news agencies whom they usually pay. And that's what you pay a lot of money for. It's bribe money. It's money you give to Fusion GPS and they give the guys who run their dirt. The CIA knows this. That's why they use Confusion GPS. And that's probably why Brennan was using Confusion GPS. We know they were accessing the NSA database back in the fall of 2015. Who was in charge then? Certainly wasn't the FBI. Had to be Mr. Potato Head and his little group. Then, of course, we have Smelly Nellie, Nellie Orr, the open researcher for the CIA, with her little ham radio and her hubby, gathering data over there as the number 2 man at the DOJ NSD, and meeting with Christopher Steele on at least 2 occasions, all of them working feverishly on the dossier, which they would feed to the launderer, Christopher Steele, who would turn around and feed it back to the FBI, a dossier that has now completely been debunked. Of course, that didn't stop the FBI and the DOJ from using the fake dossier to get a Title I FISA warrant and 3 renewals of that warrant. Still, from all that, we have no evidence. None. No evidence. Other than what has been manufactured. The Papadopoulos thing, manufactured. The dossier, manufactured. First they said it was a dossier. That's how they got the FISA warrants. But then they told us that they started their investigation in July, Operation Hurricane Crossfire, Crossfire Hurricane, whatever it is. Started that July 31st based on the Papadopoulos Downer conversation. So, as you can see, both pieces of evidence were manufactured, and that has been exposed and is being exposed. The Papadopoulos thing right now is under very close scrutiny. The dossier has already been knocked out of the water, and so as you can see, it's more fail. Every single thing they did was a fail. By this time that all this is happening, remember all these events are happening all at once. They are flooding. Brennan is using these 6 agencies and his buddies across the pond to flood the environment with fake news, lies, using every possible tactic, including frame-ups, surveillance, and everything else he could throw against the wall to see what would stick. So, while this is going on, and they're doing all this, we have Halper, who has now cultivated Page and Clovis, and he has worked his way into Papadopoulos. After wooing Papadopoulos to England on the lure of some cash and being able to write a paper, and then making him the head guy of this Cambridge think tank over economic security and economic and energy, in this position where he would come in contact with Mr. Mifsud and Mr. Halper. So Halper gets pops over to England, woos him over there, and he finally makes his move by running a Boris and Natasha routine on Papadopoulos. But Papadopoulos, obviously a Bullwinkle fan, probably never missed an episode, and knowing that routine and feeling like he was being recorded at that critical moment when he was supposed to spit it out, he didn't. In fact, he spit the bait, spit it right back at Boris, who angrily got up from the table and exited, leaving it to Natasha to take over. But Pops wasn't buying it. He kept it in his pants, and it was another busted frame-up. It was supposed to be Papadopoulos. There was a lot of effort put in there. He was supposed to say that to Downer, but he didn't. He wouldn't say it to Boris or Natasha. And so, all they got, that was supposed to be the link of this campaign team member who was the connection, the back door to the Russian-Trump collusion story. But it turned into a bust. The best they got from Pops was for him to plead guilty to lying to them, process crimes, and mostly lying about embellishments and not meeting people he said he met, because he was just trying to embellish himself, really. Those types of lies. Next, let's move on to the next thing here. Yes. Oh, but maybe they could still get something, so they bring in the professor and down the hatch Downer. Now, this particular frame-up, which is now being uncovered as an obvious fraud, was to have the professor gain Papadopoulos' trust there at the Cambridge Institute there, where Mr. Misfit, who is, of course, known as Source B of the dossier, a claim he denies, was supposed to tell Papadopoulos about the Russians having dirt on the Right Reverend Clinton. Then Alexander Downer would reach out to Papadopoulos about an article he was instructed to write, to have a meeting where Papadopoulos would tell Downer about the Russians having dirt. Then, of course, Mr. Downer, with his clout and prestige, could pass that tip on to British intelligence and on to Mr. Potato Head. That's how that frame-up was supposed to go. But it didn't work out. Again, it was a fail. Now, the Professor Misfit also denies that he was the source for Papadopoulos or the dossier, or the Hillary Rotten Clinton email tip. Of course, I don't believe him. I think he's lying. This too, right now, as we speak, is being unraveled. Kim Strassel did a great article, so did Paul Sperry. More people are starting to take a closer look, especially in the path that the intelligence followed. We know Mr. Downer went straight to the American Embassy in London, violating the rules. Why is that? Because by doing so, he kept it out of the Five Eyes, which shares everything. Had he done the normal procedure, it would have been shared with all Five Eyes. But Mr. Potato Head, obviously, and Mr. Dearlove didn't want that to happen. They wanted to feed it directly internally, keep it within this little group. That's why Mr. Downer did it the way he did it. So it's all being unraveled. And once it has been, in a few weeks or months, this will be another one that failed. Another frame-up that failed. Now, of course, they get to the point where desperation has set in. They got a big problem. They've had a massive intelligence operation with no predicated evidence of a crime, or any evidence credible enough to even be used in the electronic communication, the EC. So, they must create the evidence after the fact to justify all the surveillance that had been going on since at least the fall of 2015. But so far, all their plots, frame-ups, fake intelligence, manufactured propaganda had failed. They had come up empty. This is why I declare that they have failed. More evidence? Sure. Here we go. Maybe they thought they would take another shot at Michael Caputo. Forget about him? I didn't. Michael Caputo, let's see, they took the first shot at Michael Caputo to frame him, and that failed. That was in early May, basically as Comey was in the process, as this was happening, the first time they approached Caputo in early May. If you remember, a lot of things happening in early May when they approached Caputo. That was when Comey was writing the Right Reverend Clinton exoneration letter. That's when Trump was about to be named officially the winner of the GOP primary. Papadopoulos had just got to London and was being groomed by Misfit and Downer. Michael Caputo is then approached by an intermediary who he has named to the FBI and Mueller and the House Intel and Senate Judicial Committees. The intermediary tries to get Caputo to accept emails from the Right Reverend Clinton that would come from his source, who was a former NSA contractor, whose identity can also be known, by the intermediary and Mr. Caputo. The first attempt on May 9th was a fail, because it's always a fail with this group. So they try a second time on June the 11th, basically about 5 weeks later. But by then, Caputo has left the campaign and tells the intermediary again to buzz off. And he says, dirt on the Right Reverend Clinton? Who doesn't have dirt on the Right Reverend Clinton? She's a target-rich environment. Oh well, another fail for Mr. Potato Head and his group of dirty, incompetent stooges. Of course, at the same time all this is happening, back on the home front, the weaponization of the media through calculated leaks from this particular group. That's where them leaks were coming from. That's why they can't find them. They didn't come from the FBI, the DOJ. Some probably did. Probably originated there. But they were leaked out of this secret little group, this little agency thing that Brennan created. That's the pipeline. Right there. So they have the weaponization of the media going on, at least until about October 24th, 2017, when the Washington Post revealed that, just as suspected, the Right Reverend Clinton was the one all along with the DNC, which she was controlling, that paid for the discredited dossier. Uh-oh. And ever since then, the media has been on defense from the crimes that they were involved in. They were accomplices in. And that's why they are trying just as hard and working so hard to help cover, because they are going to be, many journalists and media organizations, as this is unraveled, are not going to get out of this unscathed by any stretch. A lot of reputations in the media will be ruined. They didn't necessarily commit crimes unless you can prove they knowingly collaborated, knowing what the objective was, but they were just useful idiots for Mr. Potato Head and his little agency. WikiLeaks, of course, made their presence known when they released the Podesta emails on October 7th, 2016. Then, again, on November 6th, 2016, they dropped the DNC emails, which revealed the Crooked Hillary, the Rotten Reverend Clinton, and the DNC, along with their allies in the Clinton media cult, cheated Bernie Sanders. Of course, the CIA PSYOP would now begin to spin this real issue into the ongoing operation. And they did this by claiming that Trump was working with Putin and WikiLeaks, a claim that has now, of course, lost all of its luster. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, more and more, we're hearing members of the Freedom Caucus and others, journalists and others, calling for a look at that server. People are now going back and talking about the server, and the server issue is coming back in vogue. The questions that surround the non-investigation of the server logs to verify if and who hacked or leaked files. Julian Assange has publicly challenged Adam Schifferbrains, the bug-eyed fool, and has offered to show the bug-eyed fool the evidence. Adam Schiffhead has shown no interest whatsoever in Assange's offer. The devious deep state plot has failed. The genie is out of the bottle, and she ain't going back in. The plot is unraveling day by day. All the momentum is with us. They're on total defense. That's why the coup has failed. All the surveillance, all the national security letters, agent provocateurs, spies and spy associates have failed on every plot and frame-up, on every garbage piece of intelligence. Even their weaponizing of the media as a part of their operation has now yielded very little, because there's too many members in Congress too many journalists, too many inside whistleblowers, and 60 million angry Trump supporters who are not going to go away. All of the frame-ups have failed. The coup has failed. The cover-up is being uncovered as we speak. Today, Saturday, the Washington Post, or Friday actually it was, the Washington Post reported that I.G. Horowitz, the cleanup man, the custodian, has interviewed, and they describe an individual who we know is Peter's been stroking us. Again, this time in relation to the deep state coup, if you will. Peter's been stroking us knows everything the FBI was doing. He knows on the FBI side with Operation Hurricane because he was running it. He was instrumental in all of it. The Flynn stuff, the emails, the whole 9 yards. But more importantly, he was the FBI guy inside Brennan's secret operation, which was what was really happening. Operation Crossfire was just a cover, a smokescreen. They're trying to get to the Russians. They're trying to Operation Crossfire. We're wiretapping everyone. We're trying to find the Russians to prevent them from infiltrating the campaign. We're doing Trump a favor. This was all a cover operation. While the real operation, run by Brennan down in Langley, where Peter Ben Strokinus was masterminding the FBI part of it, under the guise of a Russia investigation, was really a coup d'etat against the president. That was the real operation being run in the bowels of Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters. So, I.G. Horowitz is now going to interview Strzok, or has interviewed Peter's been Strokinus about those activities with that little agency he was working in with Mr. Potato Head. Keep in mind, essentially, Peter's been Strokinus was a liaison to Mr. Potato Head's. It was the way that Mr. Potato Head was able to use the resources of the FBI through Peter's been Strokinus, the things that the CIA can't do, domestic surveillance and national security letters and these things. Brennan took care of the foreign part, on foreign soil, manufacturing the fake raw evidence, feeding it back to the FBI so Peter's been Strokinus would have something to work with, while Peter ben Strokinus was creating a fake cover operation. Operation Hurricane Crossfire was just a smokescreen for what was really going on the other side, the dark side, down below, where folks like Mr. Ben Strokinus and his buddies hang out. And Andy McCabe will soon be indicted, and Comey will likely be the star witness against him. It's the issues that those two have which put him in dispute. Unless McCabe can prove that Comey's lying. But if he can't, McCabe is going to be facing criminal charges. And that's just for this first thing, lying to the FBI 2 times, and of course taking part in ordering Page and Corton to write those 2 stories to the Wall Street Journal, refuting their original article. But Peter ben Strokinus is also very involved in the next thing that's going to drop with the email investigation. He's involved with the Flynn thing that went down. And there's a little problem with those 302s, and he's the one that told us about it in his texts. I think Mr. Horowitz is going to take a look at those 302s. I think he will. Do you think that McCabe's looking at a lot of time? Yes, he is. And what did he tell us? If he goes down, he'll take the whole effing thing down with him. My friends, the momentum has completely changed. The attempt at the coup is over. The momentum is now on our side. We are uncovering the onion here, peeling every layer of it every day. But it's over. I have just laid out to you why. Every single thing they tried failed. All the frame-ups fail. All the fake intelligence, whether it was from Estonia or from Mr. Downer, Mr. Misfit, doesn't matter. It all fell on its face flat. And now, we've got them on the run. Happy Sunday. I'll see you all tomorrow on Monday. Take care.